Hello, I'm Stuart Kauffman. I'm very, very glad to be able to participate, even at a distance, in the conference that's taking place. I had a conflicting obligation to another conference, so couldn't come. I'm going to be speaking to you about my new book, Reinventing the Sacred, that's just been published by Basic Books. What I'm going to be talking about now is some science that suggests that, contrary to the Western tradition since Descartes and Galileo, according to which everything that unfolds in the universe is describable by natural law. In fact, part of what happens in the universe, at least in the biosphere, in the business world, in our economic life, and in our cultural and historical lives, and maybe the abiotic universe as well, is partially beyond natural law. We'll see if you agree with me. If this is true, it is an enormous change in at least the Western scientific worldview since the people of whom I spoke. Let's begin with reductionism, the reigning scientific worldview, with us since Descartes, Galileo, and Newton, if not earlier. It was best stated by Simon Pierre Laplace, who in Napoleon's time spoke of a superb intelligence which, if it knew the positions and velocities of all the particles in the universe, would be able to calculate using the calculus the entire future and the entire past of the universe, because Newton's laws are time reversible. That's the simplest statement of reductionism. There are three features of this to notice. First, it's deterministic, because Newton's laws are deterministic. That partially gave way a century later or so with the advent of quantum mechanics on the Copenhagen interpretation. Second, it's precisely the statement that everything that happens in the universe is describable by natural law, just what I will challenge in a bit. Third, it is the nothing but view of the universe, and the only things that are real in the universe in this reductionist view are particles in motion, or aggregates of particles in motion. So a man found guilty of murder in New York City, or in Mecca, or in Lebanon, is nothing but particles in motion. A couple in love on the banks of the Seine are nothing but particles in motion. The only thing that's real are particles in motion. Now, this reductionistic worldview held by many is perhaps best said by Nobel laureate Steven Weinberg, who says, "The explanatory arrows all point downward, from societies to people, to organs, to cells, to biochemistry, to chemistry, and ultimately to physics." In this worldview, we understand what it would mean when the science shall have been done to understand everything. It will all be put together in one beautiful scientific worldview. It's beautiful, but I think it's in fact profoundly wrong. The first step away from it and towards reinventing the sacred is a step towards a different scientific worldview called emergence. Already, major Nobel laureate physicists such as Philip Anderson and recently Robert Laughlin have said reductionism is wonderful. It's given us the standard model in quantum mechanics and general relativity, the Human Genome Project, but that it's not adequate even to physics. For example, Laughlin talks about the fact that a single iron atom is not rigid, an iron bar is rigid, but that, he says, is an emergent property, not to be found in a single particle. He also talks about laws of organization that are not reducible to physics, and I'll give you a hint of one such law. I am with my colleagues Phil Anderson and Bob Laughlin in this. Let me talk about the heart, namely your human heart. I do not doubt that in principle Weinberg could explain all the properties of your heart. But if we were to ask Charles Darwin, what's the function of your heart, Darwin would say it's to pump blood. And then we might say, but the heart makes heart sounds. And he would say, yes, but that's not the function of the heart. The heart evolved for good selective reasons because it was advantageous to pump blood. That's why hearts exist in the universe. Now, the physicist could, in principle, although in practice it would be very hard, deduce all the properties of the heart, but would have no way whatsoever of picking out the pumping of blood as the function of the heart, or why hearts exist in the universe. Function in the biological sense, is not a word in physics where only happenings occur. What I believe the physicist cannot do is deduce, simulate, and confirm the specific evolution of our specific biosphere, where quantum events like cosmic rays causing mutations and other quantum events matter to the detailed evolution of the biosphere. It would take an infinite or second-order infinite number of simulations, and how would you ever confirm any one of them anyway as being right for this specific biosphere? The physicist can't do it. In a moment, I will show you that the physicist cannot deduce the evolution of the biosphere either, which is what I want to come to now. And in fact, this is the most radical thing that I'm going to say, the heart of the new scientific worldview, and more than a scientific worldview. I need to describe what Darwin meant by a pre-adaptation. His thought was the following: there could be a property of an organ or an organism of no functional significance in the current environment, like heart sounds, that might become significant selectively in a different selective environment, so be selected. I'm going to give one example. Some fish have an organ called a swim bladder, partially filled with air, partially filled with water, and the height of the water in the swim bladder adjusts neutral buoyancy in the water column. Here is how the swim bladder is thought to have evolved. There are some fish with lungs. In these fish, some of the fish got water in their lungs. When the water was in the lungs, you now had a sac partially filled with air, partially filled with water. It was pre-adapted without any design, just by chance, to be useful for a new function, namely becoming a swim bladder. So that's a Darwinian pre-adaptation. They happen all the time in the biosphere, in the economy, and in human cultural evolution. Now I want to make a number of points about the swim bladder. First, did a new function come to exist in the biosphere, neutral buoyancy in a water column? Of course the answer is yes. Did it have causal consequences for the evolution of the biosphere? Of course the answer is yes, new species, new molecules, and so on. Now I want to come to my central critical big question. Does anyone watching this think that he or she could say ahead of time all possible Darwinian pre-adaptations for all organisms alive now, or just for people? Nobody that I have ever met among now thousands of people think that the answer is yes. We all seem to think the answer is no. At least two of the reasons why this seems impossible are the following. How could we conceivably pre-specify all possible selective environments? We have no idea whatsoever what they might be. And furthermore, how could we possibly pre-specify one or several aspects or features of an organism or a group of organisms that might turn out to be Darwinian pre-adaptations? There seems to be no way whatsoever to do this. So, not having you in front of me, let's say that we all agree with this. Its implications are utterly radical. Let's watch them. First of all, it means that we cannot do what Newton told us to do. Picture a billiard table with billiard balls. Newton said identify the variables, the laws, namely Newton's laws, the initial conditions, namely positions and velocities, and the boundary conditions, the boundary of the billiard table, and compute the forward positions and movements of all the balls. We can't do that for the biosphere because we don't know about swim bladders until they arise. We don't know about lungs, livers, the middle bones of your ears that derive from jawbones of a fish. We don't know the variables beforehand, so we can't write down equations for the evolution of the biosphere. We can't do what Newton told us to do. The second thing is we cannot make statistical statements about the occurrence of Darwinian pre-adaptations, because to do so we would have to know what the space of possibilities is in order to construct a probability measure. But we don't know what the space of possibilities is. That's precisely our problem. We do not know what the adjacent possible, that which will come to exist next, or could come to exist next in the biosphere, might be, which keeps changing as the biosphere evolves. But this means something further that's stunning. What's a natural law? Well, it's a compact description of the regularities of a process. Newton's laws are a perfectly fine example, as are Einstein's. Does anybody think we could have a compact description of the regularities of the process describing the evolution of swim bladders? Well, the answer is clearly no. We couldn't even pre-state the existence and possibility of swim bladders, let alone have a law about it. Now, if that's correct, it means something stunning. It means that the evolution of swim bladders and their analogs, not only in the biosphere but in technological evolution, are partially beyond natural law. And that means that the dream since Galileo, and I call it the Galilean spell, with admiration for brilliant Galileo, the dream that everything that unfolds in the universe is describable by law, looks like it's not true. But this overturns everything. If the unfolding of the biosphere in our economic life and our cultural life are not fully describable by natural law, if it just becomes in the adjacent possible, what is it that's happening? Well, what it is a ceaseless creativity that we can never foretell, or can rarely foretell, or certainly cannot foretell all of the possibilities. So there is a ceaseless creativity in the unfolding of the biosphere, economy, I think the abiotic universe, I think even at the quantum classical boundary, although I'm still trying to prove that. But that's the creativity that I want us to point to. First, let me talk about it from the human front. If we do not know what's going to happen, say you're a businessman trying to make an allocation of your resources and you don't know what's going to happen and you misallocate your resources, then reason, the highest virtue of the Enlightenment, is an insufficient guide for living our lives. It means that we need reason, emotion, intuition, allegory, metaphor, everything we can bring to bear in our biohistorical lives to manage to live our lives as full human beings. But that means we have to reunite our humanity in a way that we have never, ever done. This harkens back to the civilization in southern Spain trying to understand what it meant to live a good life as full human beings in accord with now a creative nature.